As the decision on whether to extend the eviction ban draws near, with all signs pointing to the ban being lifted at the end of March, I think it's safe to say we have a very big problem on our hands. Each month the homeless figures keep rising, the cost of renting is at an all-time high while supply is at an all-time low, and yet the government are still twiddling their thumbs and doing nothing of substance to actually address the issues. The eviction ban was meant to be an emergency measure to avoid even greater numbers of people and families becoming homeless during the winter period. The government would have you believe that the fact that the homeless numbers kept rising during this ban means that the ban was ineffective. Indeed, on Taoiseach Leo Varadkar is front and centre, as usual, telling us all that it didn't work. He points to the month-on-month increases in homeless numbers as evidence that the ban didn't work. Just another example of Leo Varadkar willfully missing the point, if you ask me. The real question is, how much worse would the numbers have been without the ban? But of course that doesn't fit the government narrative, now does it? That doesn't fit the story that they are doing all they can and that they alone are the ones with the ability to fix the problem, all while conveniently glossing over the fact that they caused the problem in the first place and have had years to fix things. So let's talk for a second about what the government plan to tackle the housing and rental crisis actually is. Does anybody really know? Because all I've seen is waffle, lies and gaslighting. I've seen targets for social and affordable housing missed time and time again, revised down time and time again, and yet still missed. I've seen the gaslighting waffle that the targets were actually hit when the dogs on the street concede that they haven't been. I've heard the excuses, I've heard the platitudes, and I've heard the lip service, but I've yet to see any real action. The eviction ban was clearly just a ploy to appear like they were doing something, to appear like they cared. The ban alone was never going to solve any issues. It was always only a stopgap, a stay of execution. Ultimately, it was a measure that gave some breathing room. But instead of using that time to devise new strategies to deal with the root problems, what did the government do? Absolutely nothing, that's what. And now they are bemoaning that it didn't work. Now they are trying to come up with solutions, after the time has passed. If you were a cynic like myself, you might be thinking they aren't all that bothered about the homeless crisis at all. And that's what I want to talk about today. Why are the government so useless when it comes to this issue? Obviously, this is a multi-layered, multifaceted problem, and so the solutions will not be simple or quick. However, there are plenty of obvious steps that could be taken to alleviate the issues, or steps that would at least start to. Obviously, actually building social and affordable housing would be a good start. A real derelict property tax as opposed to the seemingly opt-in tax they brought in recently. A cap on rents, or better yet, rents tied to inflation. A use it or lose it approach to housing and land, especially land that has planning permission but is sitting idle. A quicker turnaround for vacant council and social housing. And that's just a few ideas off the top of my head, but this has to be an all or nothing approach. One single thing will not work on its own, as evidenced by the eviction ban. Leo Varadkar, in yet another lip service moment of his, said we need a COVID-style response to the housing crisis. I disagree. I believe we need a bank bailout-style response to the housing crisis. If we can do it for the banks, we can do it for the people. But why is there so much rhetoric and no actual action from the government? Could it perhaps be because of just how many landlords and landowners are sitting on government benches and are benefiting from record high rents? Thanks in no small part to the ditch, we are finally seeing the true scale of the vested interests that are sat on government benches. Robert Troy and his housing empire may be the poster boy and possible worst offender, although Michael Healy-Rae would give him a run for his money, but he is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Dáil Éireann and the landlord class. Robert Troy, incidentally, found another 2 properties down the back of his couch to list on the Dáil register. But sure, that could happen to anyone, couldn't it? I mean, who among us has not forgotten owning an extra property or 2? It's just disgusting at this stage, isn't it? And worse, Robert Troy and his forgetfulness is earning twice the average industrial wage and more than twice the starting salary of a secondary school teacher. And that's just from his TD salary, mind, not to mention his rental empire. Now you tell me, who should we value more? But this is the crux of the problem. Almost 80 TDs and senators are landlords, landowners, or both. We have current ministers, past ministers, and career politicians who all have vested interests due to their own rental or land portfolios. TDs such as Robert Troy's party colleagues and ministers for health and education respectively, Stephen Donnelly and Norma Foley, TDs from all across the political spectrum, a number of whom are so forgetful that they can't remember earning anything at all from their rental units. We've got TDs such as Minister for Social Protection Heather Humphreys and her party colleague Richard Bruton sitting on large amounts of land. And don't forget all those properties and land in partners' and spouses' names. And on it goes. And how could we forget Leo Varadkar on Taoiseach and his own rental property? A government full of landlords and landowners. A government full of haves governing a population of have-nots. So is there any confusion remaining as to why our government are doing so little? It's in their best interests to keep rents high, house prices high, and land prices high. There is a very big problem in Irish politics whereby vested interests have sway on issues that they themselves can benefit from. Just ask Damien English and his work with mortgage arrear reforms and questions in the Dáil and Shannon about vulture funds, all while he himself had distressed mortgages bought by those very same funds. The government is supposed to be for the people, by the people, and yet here we have a situation where so many in positions of power abuse that power in their own self-interests. The housing issue is one of the single biggest issues facing our country and is only getting worse for those of us who find ourselves on the wrong side of the divide. How can we trust a government to do right for the people it is supposed to represent when the actions that need to be taken would affect the individual earnings of those in power? And that brings us to the current crisis we find ourselves in, the eviction ban being lifted. An absolute avalanche of evictions are coming at the end of March, like some sick April Fool's joke, and yet the government are actually defending their decision to lift the ban. Who knows if the Sinn Féin motion to extend the ban will actually do anything, but it's the only hope for a great many people who find themselves on the wrong end of a no-fault eviction. We can but hope. Thousands of people and families are being thrown to the wolves in order to save to save landlords. Landlords being placed higher up the pecking order than ordinary people who have no choice but to rent. What we have heard from TDs, ministers on Tánaiste and on Taoiseach is that they find it hard to defend the lifting of the ban, but are ploughing ahead with it anyway. Why? To appeal to their core voter base of landlords like themselves. You couldn't make it up. A serious question needs to be asked about where these people and families are meant to go on April 1st. No answers given in leaders' questions, unless the question was how to be as infantile and juvenile as possible while whining about legitimate questions and playing the victim card. As I said, the eviction ban was meant to give some breathing room, and I think most people assumed that meant breathing room for the government to get plans in place to house the people that were going to be affected. But I think it's fair to say that what they really meant was breathing room for the tenants involved to find somewhere else to live themselves, because the government damn sure weren't going to bother their arse. There is no point in the government waffling on about how the councils have power to buy up stock from landlords that are selling in order to keep tenants in situ, or their Housing for All plan when none of that helps the people who find themselves homeless on April 1st. There is no empathy from government benches for those people. Instead, we have on Taoiseach Leo Varadkar empathising with the landlords. He's more worried about the only 16% of landlords serving no-fault eviction notices who want to move back into their property, rather than the huge amounts of people about to be homeless, on top of the already ever-growing figures. And as an aside, because this is something that always really annoys me, when you decide to rent out your property, it ceases to be your home, and it becomes the tenant's home. It may be your property, but it's your tenant's home. Landlords seem to constantly forget their obligations to their tenants in this regard. You rent out your property and then decide you want to move back in? Nah, you're not getting any sympathy from me. Your inexperience with being a landlord is not the tenant's fault. But back to the matter at hand. It is clear as day that the government really just don't care about renters. And is it any wonder when so many of them are landlords themselves? It is really a sickening situation we find ourselves in. An eviction ban that was all for show, and now the mask has slipped, and the true callous nature of the government is laid bare for all to see. Families losing their homes because of greed. Families with nowhere to go as there's no room at the inn. Families cast aside in order to appease a class of people who have more than they need, especially at a time of crisis. Because make no mistake, landlords have more than they need. You do not need more than one property. You only need one home. Landlords are currently enjoying an embarrassment of riches, no matter how much they try to make the general public feel sorry for them. We have record high rents with Celtic Tiger level property prices. So they either rake it in rent or sell up and cash out. All while the wealth divide increases and permanent homes drift further out of reach of ordinary hard-working people. We need a radical overhaul of how we treat housing in this country. Houses should be for homes, not investments. We need to remember that landlords only serve themselves. No landlord is in the game to be benevolent. They are in it to make money. Money at the expense of others who need a home, a basic human right. And any landlord politician also only serves themselves, which goes against everything a public representative is meant to be. The landlord problem in Dáil Éireann needs to be addressed. Public representatives should not be landlords. End of story. Less landlords in Dáil Éireann is what we need first and foremost to actually address this issue in good faith. Until then, we will see more pandering to the haves at the expense of the have-nots, more vested interests working only for themselves. The eviction ban needs to be extended until the government sort themselves out. If they don't, one single question will ring out loudly. Where do they go? Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe to the channel for more from me. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to be notified of new content as it becomes available. You can also follow me on Twitter for my real-time ramblings. Until next time, slán go fóill.